I got a clip that Adam Schiff, who's one of the lead managers of the impeachment hearing that's getting underway today, and I want you to listen to this because there's a lot of things that's being said, and I think, this is very important. This is a bombshell. There's no doubt about that. Because Trump been running around here and all have been running around here talking about Trump wasn't involved and he wasn't trying to hold back that money, try to get an investigation into Joe Biden. But Bolton is, but I can tell you this as well. I'll tell you this later. Tell you now. I'll tell you now. I'll tell you later when I tell you later. But that Giuliani is going to be really the one. This, and we'll see whether or not the senators are going to vote to hear this. Mr. Engineer, roll that clip out. I think we got that clip of Bolton, Allison Camerati and Adam Schiff, lead manager of the impeachment hearing.
The New York Times is reporting that John Bolton, the former national security advisor, heard President Trump say that he was withholding military aid to Ukraine until they helped with investigations into Democrats. The Times cites sources who saw a draft of the manuscript of Bolton's upcoming book. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, the lead impeachment manager. Chairman Schiff, thank you very much for being here. It's an important day, obviously, for you and everyone. How do these revelations of what you've just heard from the New York Times reporting change the Senate trial?
Well, I think very dramatically. But first, I should say there is already direct evidence of this link between the $391 million of aid, military aid for Ukraine, and the president's demanding that these political investigations get done. Mick Mulvaney himself admitted that was the case. Gordon Sondland also already testified that he talked to the president, and while the president denied a quid pro quo during the same conversation, he said, but Zelensky has to go to the mic and essentially announce these investigations. But this would be another witness that would corroborate in very direct terms, if this report is accurate, that the president told him unequivocally he was holding up the money until Ukraine did these investigations. It completely blasts another hole in the president's defense. And I think for the senators, and I'm not just talking about the four that have been so much the focus of attention, for every senator, Democrat and Republican, I don't know how you can explain that you wanted a search for the truth in this trial and say you don't want to hear from a witness who had a direct conversation about the central allegation in the articles of impeachment. Because all of these senators on March 17th, when this book comes out, are going to be asked if they don't support calling him as a witness, why didn't you want to hear from him when he could have given you information before you rendered your verdict? And I just would not want to be in a position of having to answer that question.
Well, I mean, just to touch on what you first said, if you're saying that you already have this direct witness testimony in the form of Mick Mulvaney and Gordon Sondland, how important is John Bolton to the Senate trial now?
Well, look, our view is the evidence is already overwhelming. But the president has tried, as you played, Mr. Purpura, to contest those facts. And we made this point in our pre-buttal, that is, if they seek to contest any of the allegations here, then they are making the argument for additional witnesses. They're making the argument to call the people that we want to call. And I think the president's false tweets this morning are just a further false exculpatory. He said we didn't try to get his testimony in the House when we did. He said that we claimed that they had no meeting at the United Nations when we showed video footage of them having a meeting at the United Nations. He claimed that he gave them the aid earlier than expected or something along the line, just patently false. When you have essentially the defendant making false statements, it's just further evidence of guilt. But at the end of the day, Allison, this is the test for these senators. They've taken an oath to be impartial. They've just learned there's a key witness going to the heart of the allegations. The question they have to answer is, do they want to hear the truth? Do they want to cross-examine John Bolton? John Bolton, according to the president, is not telling the truth. Well, let's put John Bolton to the test. He's willing to do it. Question is, are the senators willing to hear the truth?
Let me read the tweet that you were referring to, because this is clearly on the president's mind this morning. So he tweeted, "The Democrat-controlled House never even asked John Bolton to testify. It is up to them, not up to the Senate!" Exclamation point. As you point out, that's not right. You did ask John Bolton to testify, but you didn't subpoena him. Do you now regret not subpoenaing John Bolton?
No, because we subpoenaed his deputy, and they're represented by the same lawyer, and the deputy sued us. And the counsel said, if you subpoena John Bolton, he'll sue you also. And basically, they would tie us up in court endlessly. When we did subpoena another witness, Don McGahn, we are still in court now 9 months later. So here's the situation, and this is, I think, the reason that John Bolton has offered to testify in the Senate. He's got a book coming out in March. He also does not want to be in the position of withholding this information until his book comes out. Now, that's not an excuse, frankly, for his failure to testify in the House. He should have come to the House. He should not have threatened to sue us if we subpoenaed him. There's no argument that he needed to go to court to get the court to adjudicate this when he has now acknowledged there's nothing classified in what he has to say, and he's put it all in a book. But nevertheless, he's offered to testify now. We're ready to hear his testimony. We'll be pushing again for his testimony, and I think all of the senators are now really hard-pressed to turn him away.
But if the Senate, for whatever reason, decides not to hear from John Bolton, will you subpoena him to appear before your House committee?
I don't want to go into any kind of a backup plan, because the reality is the senators ought to hear this witness firsthand. They ought to evaluate his credibility. The president and his allies are obviously out there attacking him, saying this is not true. The question is, do we believe the president and his not under oath tweets, or are we going to believe John Bolton when he is under oath? And the senators should see that live. I think the American people should see his testimony live. What are they afraid of? Well, I think we know, because they had the manuscript, and now we see why they're desperately trying to prevent him from testifying. And President Trump's claim that the only reason he doesn't want John Bolton to testify, his earlier claim, was because he's protecting the office of the presidency for future presidents. We see now just how shallow and false that pious explanation was.
Have you had a chance to read this manuscript, by chance?
No, I certainly haven't.
Will you now, today, try to get it from the publisher?
You know, what I think is more important than the manuscript, and I don't have an answer for you to that question right now, but are John Bolton's notes. And this is another theme that we've seen throughout the trial, and that is several key witnesses, Ambassador Taylor, George Kent, and others, took detailed notes. Mr. Morrison took detailed notes. Now we learn that John Bolton took detailed notes, and presumably these are contemporaneous. These notes took place while the events were happening, while they were fresh in his mind. Those, in many respects, are more important than the manuscript. So we ought to not only have John Bolton testify, but we ought to see what he wrote down in his notes at the time.
The president tweeted about you yesterday, and he said basically, quote, that you had not paid the price yet for all of this. You said you took that as a threat. What kind of threat?
Well, look, I don't think you view this tweet in isolation. This is a president who accuses me of treason and has accused the whistleblower of treason and said there are ways to treat people. We used to have a way of treating people who are traitors and spies. I don't think there's really much doubt that he wants to at least give the suggestion that the retribution should be of a kind other than at the ballot box. This is, the president's kind of organized crime speak, and that people would tolerate that or not condemn that in a president, just shows how this president has brought down the stature of his office and debased the public discourse. And
just so I'm clear, you mean a threat to your personal safety?
I think it's intended to be personally threatening. I think that's exactly what the president has in mind. And, the fact that he would even leave it ambiguous tells you that this is a president who we know has tried to intimidate witnesses and tried to discourage other people from coming forward, like the whistleblower. So sadly, this is, part and parcel of the kind of conduct we've seen from this president.
And Chairman, last, are you surprised to hear that the White House has had a copy of this manuscript since December 30th?
Well, I didn't know that they had, but no, it's not at all surprising because it explains why they are so terrified of having John Bolton testify and why they have had tried to raise all these hurdles to his testimony. But now the veneer has been torn off. The American people can see the president is clearly trying to hide the truth here. The question is, will the senators participate and help the president, or will they demand to see the evidence, demand to hear the truth before they're asked to render a verdict? And I think that their oath requires them to do so.
One more thing. Are you surprised to read that John Bolton, or to hear that John Bolton is reportedly writing that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo knew that Rudy Giuliani's thoughts or schemes or conspiracy theories about Marie Yovanovitch were not true?
No, that's not surprising at all. In fact, that's consistent with other testimony that the Secretary of State knew that this was bogus. Everyone in the State Department knew that the smear against Ambassador Yovanovitch, which Giuliani continues to this day, and the president as well, was completely false. But the secretary wouldn't issue a statement supporting the ambassador because there was fear the president would undercut the secretary or the department with an angry tweet. And this is, sadly what this administration has become. Fear of all the people who work in the administration, a lot of people outside the administration, of being on the receiving end of one of the president's angry tweets. What I find remarkable about those tapes, those Parnas tapes that have been released in the last few days, is the President of the United States would order an ambassador fired based on the representation of nothing more than the representation of one of his donors at a dinner. And that the president would operate this way and then make false statements about his even knowing these people, just shows what a continuing danger he poses in that office.
This is an extraordinary crossroads, I think, for the once great nation of America, because there are several things at play here. And I don't know that the senators that are Republican will vote to hear John Bolton's testimony. I find it difficult for me to logically appreciate the fact that they'll say, no, we don't want to hear it, even though it's been published and we know it's true that Trump did blackmail, bribe, extort the $391 million from the supporting of a nation, by the way, that desperately needed it. Zelensky needed that money desperately to fight the Russians who've now taken over the east part of Ukraine. The matter here is not that America is looking for, or at least the Republicans at this point are looking for honesty and morality anymore. That's not their game. That's not what the Republicans stand for now. They may have at one point in time been a biblically based morality, sort of a, if you will, physical, if you will, restrained group, but not anymore. Trump has stole $1.5 trillion from the Treasury and gave it to all his rich friends. Running around talking about how black people are now doing better now than they've ever done. That's a lie. It's a lie. I'm telling you, I live in Harlem and South Bronx and Brooklyn, and I know it's a lie. Black people are not doing better now than they've ever done. I know it's a lie. And these people need to stop saying it. I don't care what the numbers say about the unemployment roll. Just because somebody got a job now as a messenger or working at McDonald's, and there are not as many people unemployed, or people have stopped looking for work for years, don't mean that black people are doing better. But that's another part of the whole process. So the process is now is what? Will the senators say, no, we don't want to hear John Bolton, and then vote to acquit Tribulation Trump? Will they do that? They're brazen enough. I can tell you that right now. They're brazen enough. And what's at stake for the Republicans is serious enough, which is an autonomy that they seem to be losing here in America. Their political, economic autonomy is dwindling away. And so they're brazen enough to protect Trump. And they very well may do so. I tell you this as well. This business at Bolton, not only is he going to, if his book is going to expose Tribulation Trump when it comes out in March, the 17th of March, but it's also going to expose people like Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, and a bunch of others as well, that they're crooks. And, the language that Trump used, I can understand being graphic and being, putting it where people can get it kind of language, but he talks like a mafia, threatens people. He's not threatening Adam Schiff. He threatened Maria Yovanovitch when she was testifying that some bad things were going to happen to her. I mean, who does that? Who does that? And how can Mitch McConnell and all these other senators stand up with someone like that? I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. Let me say this as well, that Fox News, we were able to receive this, understand this weekend, that Fox News did not carry the impeachment hearings wall to wall last week when the managers were bringing forth their presentation. Fox didn't carry it, they just did their regular programming. And I suppose the reason why they did not is because they just didn't want their audience to see all that hard truth coming at them. And trust me, if what the managers were saying were lies, as many people are claiming, Fox would have been all over it. It would have been wall-to-wall coverage, but they didn't. This is a bit of a news blog we do, looking at spiritual wickedness in high places for the most part, making some observations about it and giving people a biblical foundation to the way of interpreting, rather than have Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham or Janine Pirro or Anderson Cooper or Rachel Maddow or Don Lemon, Rush Limbaugh interpret what's going on in the world. You come to me and I'll tell you based on what the Word of God says. They'll just give you their worldly, sinful view. But the Manning Report will tell you what God has said, whether to say yea or nay, whether to go or to stay. You'll be led by the word of Almighty God. Come to the Manning Report on a daily basis to interpret the spiritual wickedness in high places, because there's plenty of it that's going on. And so I am he. I'm the Lord's servant, James David Righteous Rebel Manning. And I'm here to serve you with news and information.